we are demoing the Nuvo crystal drops as well as my new layering stencil, and I have chosen the butterfly stencil just because it has the most amount of layers, and it's actually the only one at this point anyways that has both the stencil and the mask of the outline shape. So I want to show how you can utilize and play around with that a little bit over and above all the little layering details inside of the shape itself. So I will start by sort of showcasing and talking about this first version of it that I created. So with this one, what I did was I took this piece of paper outside, I laid my mask down, and I took 4 dilution sprays, and I just obviously pink, orange, yellow, and green, and I sprayed in one direction, sprayed, brought it in, heat set it so that the ink was dry. But if you've ever sprayed, especially like this much spray, you can see the paper is quite saturated, so I clearly used quite a bit of spray. It warps the paper and makes it sort of curl a little bit. So then my surface was not flat. So that was problem number 1 when it came time to applying the medium of choice over top of my stencils. Problem number 2 was that I forgot my pixie spray at the store. So I had to be holding them in place rather than allowing the pixie spray to hold my stencil down. So mixing that with the fact that this paper is warped and sort of like not flat anymore, it made it really hard for me to keep this stencil laying flat when I applied. So I did get quite a few times where the ink did run underneath of my stencil, and so I didn't get a perfect image. It is still a beautiful project, and I love it. I'm still gonna put this to use, but it didn't turn out as nice as I had hoped, and so I decided for my next attempt, I was going to do all of the stenciling and inking first and then do the spraying. But then once I got to this stage, I actually really liked the just clean white background, so I left that one the way that it was. But both are really cute, and depending on what you were doing with it and what type of project and person this was going to, either are great options. But I wanted to show just how nice it looked just on a nice white piece of paper as well. And you can see that I got much more success. I did mess, there's like one little spot here where the Nuvo crystal drop sort of seeped underneath of my stencil, but when my paper wasn't warped from the spray, it was much easier to get a good clean application. So what I did was very first, because these layering stencils, I'll show you here. Each one, there's 5 different layers, and they don't look like all that much on their own. Each one has, you know, elements. It's kind of like what Lindsay was talking about earlier with that stamp that you like spin. When you look at it originally, it doesn't look like a whole bunch, but by the time you've done layered them all up, it's a beautiful image. But when you look at just any one color, it doesn't look like much. So for me to start this and just, you know, stencil this pink on, I wouldn't know where to go next with the orange and the yellow. So you do need that butterfly shape, but I wanted my Nuvo crystal drops to pop, and they are a little bit semi-translucent. So if I had laid my butterfly mask down first and inked or sprayed or, you know, applied some sort of color over top of this to get my butterfly shape, then when I went and applied my Nuvo crystal drops over top, these bright, bold colors would have been dulled down a little bit by whatever ink was applied underneath. So I really wanted them on a nice, crisp white paper for this particular project. I mean, sometimes it'll be nice to have the colors layered, but in this instance, I wanted it to be on white, but I still needed the outline of my butterfly shape to help me and guide me in placement of my layers of my stencils. So what I did was I took my mask, which is the cool thing about this layering stencil. It has the mask and the stencil of the shape. So I laid the mask down and took black ink and gave myself the outline of that butterfly without impacting the white on the inside. So I still got that outline, I still got that guide that I needed to help me place my stencil, but I also still was able to keep my center area that I wanted to apply my inks over top of a nice bright white. So I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly what I'm talking about. So step one was to lay my mask down. Now, if I was at the store and had all my supplies and not at home where I always forget at least 14 things that I needed for the crop, I would probably spritz this with a little bit of pixie spray first and then set it down just so that it sat nicely in place. But I am perfectly capable of holding it. My fingers will probably just get a little dirty. So I've just got my black soot distress ink and my little blending handle and foam. And I'm going to just gently ink around the outer edge. I just want a nice soft little shape. I don't want to get too aggressive with my inking. I just want a soft little, almost like halo around the outer edge of my butterfly. And I do have to be careful again without my pixie spray. I need to be careful because these antennas could move around and wiggle around a little bit on me if I'm not careful. So I'm being a little extra gentle there, but the shape is pretty simple, so for the rest of it, it's not too hard to hold it in place actually. Holy smokes, I say that and then I wiggle it around a whole bunch. Almost done. All right, so just like that, I have a beautiful outline for my butterfly that will help guide me in placing all 5 layers of this shaped stencil, as well as give me like a really nice visual effect surrounding my butterfly image. So once I've done that, I have these 5 different layers of stencil that each contain elements of a different part of the decor of the inside of the butterfly. So I'm gonna start with this one, which I have chosen to be pink for my project. And one other thing that I have learned, I never really did Nuvo crystal drops over stencils before. Now these stencils and these techniques, I mean, you could do this with your inks or your sprays or any other media that you are familiar and used to using over top of stencils. So if this isn't for you, this Nuvo crystal drop over the stencil, that doesn't mean that this project concept isn't for you. You can just use a different type of media or medium to go over your stencil. So one trick that I have found is I would rather put more Nuvo crystal drops, because the more times I'm going back and forth, it's like if I don't have a lot of Nuvo crystal drop down on the stencil, if there's lots, 1 drag over, maybe 2 drag over, and it fills the spots easy breezy. If I don't put a lot and it's like this back and forth, the palette knife sort of creates a suction sometimes, and you accidentally like pop your stencil up and then the Nuvo drops seep underneath. So I prefer, I know it uses up more of my Nuvo crystal drops, but I would rather use lots and just do quick swipes to get a good coverage, and then I'm not back and forth, because that was where I seem to be getting the most flaws in my application. The more times I had to go back and forth over the image. I mean, you can go back and forth a couple times. It's not like you can't be doing that, but that was when I would get my flaws. So the less times you have to go back and forth, the more likely it is that you will get a nice clean application. So what I'm doing is just squeezing some of the Nuvo crystal drops right onto my stencil, taking my palette knife and just dragging it over the open spaces, which in this particular instance are these cute little dots along the top, the spine of the butterfly, the little moon, and the flower. It applies really smooth. It's a really nice, smooth application. All right, I also have a wet paper towel beside me. My stencil is like, if you were organized and like really like to keep your stencils clean, if you put this into water right away, it won't set. I'll show you with my blue one after, but I'm just setting it off to the side. So this is gonna dry onto my stencil and make a mess, but that doesn't bother me, so I don't mind. So I'm setting my stencil off to the side. If you have your little tub of water and soap or whatever you like, you can go ahead and put it in that. But I do have a wet paper towel to wipe off my palette knife in between, because this product does dry quite quickly, and it will dry onto your palette, and then it will come off in your next layers like as chunks, right? Like they'll chip off because this is a non-porous surface. So the Nuvo drops, they dry on here, but they don't stick to it, and then they'll chip off and you'll get flakes of color in your next layer. So you wanna keep your palette knife clean in between layers. Oh, and then it does dry quickly, but because I'm like hard pushing a stencil down on the next layer, I am gonna quickly heat set every layer in between. It just takes like 5 seconds, maybe 10. Which today of all days is not the most pleasant experience. It's already stinking hot in here, but I'm gonna go ahead and turn on my heat gun every 5 seconds to do a new layer of crystal drops. I didn't quite get that hard. All right, so next up, I have chosen this little piece for the orange ones, which is going to be these little flower pieces and a couple more little moons. Okay. So same thing, I've now cleaned off my palette knife. I've got my stencil, and I'm just going to over apply Nuvo crystal drops right onto my stencil, and then just scrape with the edge of my palette knife. If there's not enough, I just add some more, because again, the back and forth really can start to be tricky. And same with these hearts. I haven't got a successful one of these hearts yet for some reason. Let's see if I can get it clean. Oh, that looked pretty good. That might be a good one. I did it! The hearts are perfect, you guys. Hooray! Okay. So I've set my stencil off to the side. You would put it, thanks Julianer. You would put it into some water to keep it clean. And then I've wiped off my palette knife. I will heat set these for a little minute here. Or on a day like today, if I was doing this outside, I doubt I'd even have to heat set it. The heat out there would be more than enough to dry these in no time. Yeah, okay, so next up I've got these little like spine elements, the flower centers, and a couple cute little dots. And this one I'm going to do in the color yellow. I'm going in rainbow order because rainbows are my fave. And as I'm going, I do just try and I try to keep my hands as close as possible to the portion of stencil I'm working on, just to try and keep it as flat as I can. I'm not a super perfectionist, so it doesn't really bother me when it's a little bit off, but for the sake of the demo, I should like probably try and do a nice job, hey? One more level dab, and that will be good for you. Oh, I messed it up a little bit there. All right, so I've set that off in my would-be water container. I'm wiping my palette knife, heat the Nuvo. Now I'm going to do the green. I better check. Yep. Green one's got lots of pieces. Gotta be really careful with this guy. I know it's not really all that exciting to watch a person just like pull a palette knife over a stencil, but unfortunately that's the only way I can really show you how it's done. Just kind of travel across the stencil. I sort of seem to always start on the top right and then work my way around clockwise. Fun reveal. It's my favorite part of stenciling. It's always like a big question mark what it's going to look like underneath. That one looks pretty darn good. Looks like it's getting, just a second, it looks like it's just not this dark when I started. I'm just going to turn this other light on. All right. One final color. We'll do the blue last here. I just like to tap and make sure before I shove my stencil on top of it. And as I'm laying it down, I'm just kind of eyeballing its line up with the rest of the image. All right, blue, here we go. Almost done, guys. All right. Oh, I like really messed that one up. I was excited to be done and I screwed up in that top corner there, but that's okay. So that is how you use the layering stencils and also how you use the Nuvo crystal drops over top of a stencil just in general. This obviously, you wouldn't have to do this over top of a layering stencil. This could be over top of any type of stencil, but I do like the mix of all the different colors and all the different details. I think it's such a pretty look. And that is the demo. Does anybody have any questions?